So thank you. Thank you all so much for having me. I'm here. I live really close by, actually. It's just down in Kendall Park, in a little High Point. So it's so wonderful to be invited here into the community. And yeah, I am Lama Rod. I use he, him pronouns. Um, I am originally from this area, actually from Northwest Georgia, which is traditionally Cherokee Nation land. Um, and I grew up actually, particularly in Rome, Georgia, made infamous by Marjorie Taylor Greene. That's our representative for my hometown, so I find it very ironic. And yeah, and for many years I lived in the Northeast, in Boston, New York, Virginia, training. My root tradition is, the Black prophetic tradition, Black church. I come from a family, a line of ministers and healers as well. And in my early 20s, I answered the call to enter into Dharma after many years of activism and organizing. I was very fortunate because my introduction to Buddhism was through activists, Buddhists who were just very much engaged in what Thich Nhat Hanh would call engaged Buddhism. And the tradition that I trained in chose me, Tibetan tradition. My school is the Kagyu School of Tibetan Buddhism. The leader of my school is His Holiness the 17th Galwing Kamapa. And my root teacher, my primary teacher, was Lama Rinpoche, who passed away several years ago after leaving a lot of controversy in the world. I trained at my monastery outside of, well, Poughkeepsie, outside of New York City, but more Poughkeepsie along the Hudson River. I spent 5 years training in the monastery, almost three and a half of those years being in cloistered retreat, which in the Tibetan tradition is how one earns the title Lama. Lama means teacher, guru. Sometimes I'm definitely not a guru, but sometimes I don't know if I'm a teacher either. I talk so much shit, but but I completed my training in the monastery and was very fortunate to run a center in DC on Capitol Hill for several years before returning back to school to graduate school. And during graduate school is when I co-authored my first book, Radical Dharma, Talking Race, Liberation, and Love with Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams and Dr. Yasmin Saidullah. And we were responding to the emergence of Black Lives Matter, to the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson. And we wanted to offer the roots of really the values, the roots, the vision of Dharma as a tool for racial justice, right? And also inclusivity and openness within American sagas. And that book became very important for many people. Um, After graduate school, I was fortunate enough to publish my second book, my first solo book, Love and Rage, which was a response to the election of Donald Trump, right? Which I'll probably just, reissue it after he gets elected again. So it's been called back, into people. I will. I would have to and once again, just in case you didn't get it the first time, here it is again. And so after that election, we were told, well, a lot of people were hitting the streets, doing, activism, organizing, but people were just really pissed off. And that felt really counterproductive to, to the work people wanted to do. And so I didn't want to write a book about anger, but people were angry, and that's all I was talking about with folks. And so Love and Rage came into existence. And in Love and Rage, I really talk about the importance of love and how love holds. not just our anger, but the brokenheartedness beneath the anger, right? And I wrote it for activists in particular, a community that, of course, I've been deeply, impacted by and held by, to offer something that took me many years to understand about my own anger, right? My anger is asking to be loved. When I talk about love, I'm not talking about anything like having fun or feeling good. You can go do that somewhere else. But when I talk about liberatory love, I'm talking about first the capacity to show up to an experience, to tell the truth about the experience, right? And to not just tell the truth, but to offer ourselves permission to experience, right? What's arising for us. And in my position, being black and queer and fat and, kind of like mixed class and so forth, I was never raised to be in a liberatory relationship, well, with anything, but especially my emotions, especially my anger and my hurt. I was taught to hide that anger because my anger expressed through this body in this particular cultural context is read as dangerous, right? And it's read as something that must be suppressed. That was something that I wanted to always emphasize in my work. First, that anger is important, right? We tap into anger to figure out what's wrong. And then when we figure out what's wrong, we respond to create balance again, right? I wasn't doing that in my practice. I was afraid of my anger. So I shifted it inward and it actually began to express itself as really passive aggressiveness, right? Which is a superhuman ability, to smile in someone's face and to be cussing them out in your mind. It's very Southern, actually. Honey, bless your heart. You just got cussed out. I would say that up north when I lived in the Northeast. I would be like, bless your heart. And people loved it. They were like, thank you so much for blessing your heart. So the Buddhists would be like, it's like, they were like, oh, it's like loving kindness. It's like meta. And then I just had to tell people, it's like, I'm not actually complimenting you. I'm just saying you're a mess. And I need to get it together. Um, and so I was very fortunate. So, as when I transitioned from Georgia to Boston, it was where I really, really became immersed in activism. I had elders, Buddhist elders, who began to kind of pull me to the side and just say, Rod, we think you're angry. you know? And I was like, fuck you. I'm not angry. But the teaching, right? The teaching just started sinking in. I said, oh, yeah, I'm actually not connecting to my anger. That was the beginning of the practice. And that became a very transformative moment, right? Um, that experience really taught me many things, not just about my practice, my emotions, but also about the role of eldership. Well, without my elders, I wouldn't be here. My elders are also the many traditions that I've studied as well. So yeah, that was the beginning of my work with anger. And when 2016, 2017 rolled around, I said, okay, I have to like actually talk about this now for folks. So that was Love and Rage. Love and Rage came out in 2020, right after the murder of George Floyd. And it kind of really took off, you know. And I think it's been a really important resource for people for several years now. This is the fourth year. Actually, it's been out. Seems like it just came out, you know. Um, and so, after Love and Rage, I really began to explore different paths of healing, different paths of transformation. And this has led me into different kinds of traditions. This has also led me back into my ancestral practices, which are West African practices, as well. It's led me into, South American indigenous shamanic practices, as well, and several other things, practices as well. Um, but my root training is Tantra, right? Tantric Buddhism, Tantra, the shamanic Tantra, the Tantra connected to land, connected to the unseen, right? And that's really the spirit of Southeast Asian, practices and religions, right? And it's a really colorful, dynamic, vital practice. And it was a practice that actually gave me permission to do really deep decolonizing work around religious practice and spirituality. Tibetan Buddhism gave me permission to start asking questions about where I came from, because I was immersed in Tibetan culture, training here, but also in India and Nepal. And I would be like, God, all these people are in their tradition, in their ancestral practices, but what are mine? Right. And that's been an important part of my work leading up into my latest book, The New Saints, right? Like this work of remembering. I would say if that's the word, if someone were to ask me, okay, what is the word to describe the work of the New Saints? It is remembrance. Remembering. And I would also say this is the main project of Buddhism, is to remember. We're not creating anything. Like we're not starting from scratch. We're already awakened beings who have forgotten their awakenedness, their true natures, our true natures. And so we've gotten kind of wrapped up in form and illusion, the smoke and shadows of the phenomenal world, right? And the work of Buddhism and the primary technology of meditation, awareness, attention, is to train in returning our awareness back to what we really are. Right? Often in the traditions, we talk about who, like we are Buddhists, but a Buddha is a what? Buddhahood is an experience, it's a state. It's our most direct, authentic state. This is what we're trying to remember. Right? But to get back into that remembering, we have to begin to hold space for everything. Holding space meaning not reacting to everything, because that reactivity drives the illusion, of the phenomenal world, which we can also call samsara, right? This cycle of birth and rebirth over and over again. But the heart of samsara is the lack of agency. When I don't have agency, then I keep getting drawn into things that often perpetuate more disillusionment, right? More delusion. That takes me further and further away from the state of what I really am. Right? It drives us deeper into this this basic direct experience of suffering. And I know suffering is a big word. I have met people who are like, well, I don't really suffer, you know, which is part of the sinister nature of samsara, is when it convinces us that this is actually our home, that this is all there is. And then we get really invested in it. But we hit these crises because the phenomenal world and our belief in its realness actually becomes too rigid, right? And that rigidity, I think, is something that a lot of people are beginning to really experience right now. That rigidity is often experienced as hopelessness, right? We lose hope. That rigidity, which again is based upon this deep belief, this overwhelming belief in the realness of everything, right, is also a worship of permanence, right? This belief that, okay, everything's the same, everything's going to remain the same. And that's not the truth, right? And permanence is the law that frees us, right, from the rigidity of samsara. So in the New Saints, I am elevating my work into the realm of spiritual abolition, which is work that I'm just still in progress, right? There's still a lot of learning. But when I talk about spiritual abolition, first, I'm talking about, yes, rigidity, control, surveillance, right? I'm talking about punishment without care, without um, this love, right? Carcerality, meaning that like there is this belief that I can be contained, right? And so we experience this politically, socially, and so forth, right? You see this very clearly now happening more and more. This kind of carcerality expressed as different forms of fascism here in this country, all over the world, right? That fascism being rigidity again. It's also the ways in which we feel we have no agency to tend to our suffering, right? And we feel powerless. And in that powerlessness, we react to that suffering, which actually creates more suffering and violence for others. That's the relative carceral state. But when I talk about the spiritual carceral state, I'm talking about how delusion, ignorance, not remembering what we are actually functions as a police that keeps us really rigid and bound within the cycle, birth and rebirth, suffering, old age, sickness, all of it. Right? It continues to center suffering because without remembering what we are, we will just inherently suffer. Right. So my ancestors would say too, like this world is not our home. Right. For me, that's rooted in the Black prophetic tradition too, where it's like, no, this is a place of suffering, and what we're trying to do is transcend this suffering. We're not trying to stay here. Right? And again, this aligns with the core work of Buddhism. We're trying to actually dissolve the illusion to remember what we are. So we're already free, but we forgot that. And so in the spiritual abolition, what we're trying to do to disrupt this kind of spiritual carcerality is to awaken wisdom and compassion, which I actually call compassion care, like care, awakened care, tending to, concern, empathy, right? And then when I talk about wisdom, I'm actually talking about clarity, right? Getting clear about what's happening, what's going on. When we combine these two really powerful streams, then it begins to disrupt the carceral state. First of all, you get clear about what's actually happening, and then you start giving a shit, right? Not just for yourself, which is important. We start with ourselves. We begin to say no to carceralities, and we begin to say yes to remembering, not just for ourselves, but for others. Right. And we start caring about others, not because we want to look good, not because it's the fashionable thing to do, because we realize the suffering that comes with being bound and enslaved, right? Distant from this remembrance of what we are. It's the empathy that drives our commitment to free other beings from suffering. And this traditionally is called the Bodhisattva, which we just chanted the Heart Sutra. The Heart Sutra is my core text, so I'll try not to launch into a lecture. I'm going to spend a lot of time with the Heart Sutra because it has really been a root text for me to understand contradictions, to understand the ways in which contradictions have to be used to get free. We're not trying to work out the contradictions that the Heart Sutra awakens. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. It's madness. It's overwhelming. And then of course we're asked to figure it out, but we're not trying to figure that contradiction out. We're actually trying to show up to hold space for that contradiction, letting the energy of that contradiction kind of shove us out of this like sense of permanence and stability. It is meant to trouble us, right? That troubling actually points us to the truth of things, that troubling, that generative kind of discomfort, that actually won't let us kind of like get comfortable, right? Because liberation work isn't about comfort, which is what people think, you know. They come into spaces like this, like I'm gonna get nice and quiet and comfortable. I'm gonna sit quietly. Actually, we're meant to be troubled, right? And that troubling helps us to see that all the stuff that we're imagining fits together doesn't actually fit together. Which brings us back to the Heart Sutra. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Form is no other than emptiness, emptiness is no other than form. You sit in that contradiction, you sit in that intersection, and you allow yourself to feel how the phenomenal world has all these cracks and openings. Right? And then we start plotting our exit strategy into our remembrance. This isn't as real as I think it is. There are cracks opening. How can I actually get into those cracks and start expanding and opening, expanding from this illusion of self along with the illusions of identity, right? Because again, the Heart Sutra says, yes, there's identity, but there's no identity. You know, both of those are true, right? Not to figure out why they're true, but to just hold the space and experience what that contradiction creates for us in our practice, the troubling. But this is what the Bodhisattva, again, is trying to embody as well. Like the Bodhisattva understands the contradiction, experiences the contradiction, and blesses others around them by troubling them with this contradiction. Right? Not by being predictable, not by, enabling, not by just making people comfortable, but by troubling people through this intense convergence of deep care and clarity. And traditionally, people who embody these have been people we've avoided. Because they're not interested in our comfort. I'm not really interested in anyone's comfort. I'm not interested in anyone's happiness either. I'm interested in people's freedom. Right? You can be happy and incarcerated. A lot of people are. A lot of wealthy people think they have made it. No, I'm set. No matter what happens in the world, I'm going to have my money. I'm going to be fine. But this, again, it's not our home, right? To let go of this idea that I'm trying to make a home here and to say, no, it's time for me to actually transcend the duality and the binary, right? That I get distracted by, right? This and that, up and down, black and white. Yes, I am being called to show up, to hold, right? And in my holding, I begin to experience, like, which is really the way that we begin our transition work, right? It's the experience. What does this feel like? And when we feel it, we actually begin to let go and we say, okay, this is just an experience. And I can just be here. I don't have to react. I can respond. And this is, in the New Saints, one of, I would say, the powers of the New Saint. So the New Saint is just an expression of the Bodhisattva tradition. As I was just explaining, the Bodhisattva meaning the spiritual warrior, right, who's here to free. And so the New Saint for me is just an expression, a contemporary innovation of the Bodhisattva. And in the New Saint, I say, really that the one of the main powers of the Bodhisattva, right, is actually um, to respond, not react, but to respond, to knowingly respond to phenomena, not habitually react. Once we develop that agency, which often really is rooted in our meditation practice, then we will begin to experience the freedom that we need to experience. And of course, the great other power is to give a shit, is to care, right? To show up and to say, yeah, like there are beings who need to be freed, but I can't free other beings until I am doing the work to free myself, which is another misconception that I wanted to offer again to activists. You're trying to free me, but you're still cycling within these carceral logics. And if you're just cycling within these carceral logics and you're trying to help others, then you're actually an agent of further carcerality for others. People say, oh, that seems too individualistic. Like, why are we focusing on the self? I teach in multiple countries every year. So I go into different cultures, and they're like, oh, Ra, you're an American. And like, actually, Black American is a little different, but like, but it's like so individual, so individual. And sometimes I hear that feedback as bypassing the experience of self in relationship to collective. And I think sometimes we get together in our communities and we'll say something like, well, other people are going to do work for me. Instead, it's the other way around. If I don't do my work, I become work for other people, right? That's why some of us are so exhausted. Because not only are we doing our work, we're doing other people's work. Because we have this idea that someone is going to come along and fix us, you know. But instead, how do we choose to do this work of bringing awareness back to our own experience, right? And beginning to hold space, beginning to divest from what needs to be divested from. As Thich Nhat Hanh would teach, how do we water the seeds, that offer us experiences of peace and spaciousness and so forth. And how do we let the seeds that seem to be at the roots of violence and harm, how do we just let those wither? Right? So we divest from what is not getting us free and start reinvesting in what is getting us free. That begins with ourselves. Right? I begin to water the seeds of liberation in my own experience through deep care and clarity. When I am doing that, it really, for me, feels like I am watering a garden that begins to grow, right? It begins to just form this really beautiful, beautiful garden. And it becomes a world, offering, a beautiful offering that I feel compelled to share with others. This is how I'm experiencing freedom and liberation, and I want to share this with you. It's a very non-aggressive, kind of approach. This is what I'm experiencing, and I invite you into this. Right? I think when we think about the traditional bodhisattva path, I think it's about world building, like creating a world that we offer to those needing refuge and freedom. I think this is what the Buddha did. If the Buddha didn't do this, we wouldn't be here talking about this. The world, the Buddha, like many great spiritual teachers, right, throughout history emerged to create a world, right? And they offered that world. And there were a lot of people who grooved with it. They were like, cool, I want to build a world like that, and offer this to others who need refuge, right? And that gave birth to Buddhism, to Dharma, right? You know, this is really, in my practice, I am really influenced by many kinds of thinkers, right? I'm real gay, and so like all of that as well. One of my, I would say, mentors, elders who I never knew in life, was Andre Leon Talley, who's Black, gay man, queer man, one of the most recognized Black men in the fashion world, right? Larger than life. He grew up in Durham, and he taught me a lot through fashion, right? And he was brilliant. because well, he was a scholar, he was a French scholar, just like brilliant, like, and he was really into Voltaire, French Enlightenment work, and I was too. Actually, ironically, as a young person, like everyone sitting around reading whatever Harry Potter. Actually, I'm a little older for that. Wherever was before Harry Potter, we were all sitting around reading that in high school and middle school, and I was reading Voltaire and Malcolm X. So I have a lot of mixed different ideas, but Andre Lantale, because of like his alignment with Voltaire and the French Enlightenment, always had this idea that like one of our purposes should be to grow our garden, to offer that to people. Right? If we want to see something beautiful, we create that beauty, and as an expression of deep care, we offer that. He did that through passion. He was like, let's create beauty and offer this. And this was especially important for those of us who felt as if we didn't have access to beauty, right? That we weren't good enough to be beautiful, to have beauty. And he was like, it's not about that. It's first about you. What awakens you? What drives you? What inspires you? Get into that and then share that. Right? And as I learned more about that, of course, being, a student of French Enlightenment since, I was a teenager, like that really resonated, you know, but it really, really began to align with Dharma for me. And I realized, oh, what I am trying to do as a bodhisattva, as a new saint, is actually create a world and offer this world to others. Okay? To offer worlds where we had access to beauty and pleasure and leisure, that we had access to the things that we needed to be free and well, safe, right? To cultivate that for myself as a garden that first and foremost I began to enjoy and revel in. And then you start offering that to others. And this is also how I understand my teaching. It's an offering of the world that I've created, that I am experiencing liberation in, and beginning to invite others into this world, right? Through teaching, through writing, through, everything that I do, it's an invitation. And this is all really this work of like first doing the work for ourselves. And then the work, I think, becomes naturally expressed. I don't necessarily have to sit around thinking about how to benefit people. Like first and foremost, I think about how can I be my most honest, direct, open, spacious self? Because I know that work reduces the harm that I can potentially create, right? And so that expression of care is first for myself, but secondly for others when I reduce the potential harm that I can create for others. And then that invitation happens. You know, I am disarmed and open, and therefore I can disarm and open others. And then we come in together into this kind of belonging, this kind of community together where we begin to share the fruits of my practice and I begin to awaken the fruits of other people's practice. Right? And that again is also my whole philosophy around teaching. Right? I'm not trying to teach you something, right? Like you already know this. What I'm trying to do is invite you into something that I've created for myself and to say welcome, right? And to be attentive to the ways in which I can help you grow your garden in the same way others who invited me into their gardens taught me how to grow my plants, right? To seed, to water, to caretake, to allow things to blossom, to bloom, right? To be with that. I mean, I think sometimes when we think about the traditional Bodhisattva tradition, yeah, we often define the Bodhisattva as spiritual warrior, right? And that can come off as kind of aggressive, you know. Sometimes it does feel aggressive, right? But when we talk about warriorship, we're talking about courage, actually, right? We're talking about the courage to show up not just to the good things, but also to the discomfort, to the things that aren't fair, that don't make sense. Right? The fearlessness, which in the book, for me, fearlessness is not an absence of fear. It is rather the capacity to hold fear and to learn how to be in relation to fear as an advisor, not as something that's directing what we do, right? But to feel, to experience our fear and say, yeah, I see you. I feel you. I'm experiencing you. And this is the choice that I need to make because I am taking on the work of deep care, right? And clarity, right? And this deep aspiration to help others get free. Right? So the warriorship, yes, courage. It's like, yeah, this is what I'm going to do, right? And it doesn't have to be a production, doesn't have to be a whole thing. It's just like this is what I'm doing. I'm committing myself to the liberation of all being, right? Not just the beings that I like and love, but all beings, especially the beings who have created the most harm for me. Love is really saying that every being deserves to be free. Right? But in spiritual abolition, it's not only saying every being deserves to be free, but phenomenal reality deserves to be free from my misunderstanding of it. Right? Which is what the Heart Sutra is pointing us back to. There's a fundamental misunderstanding of everything that I'm trying to get free from, that I'm trying to free the phenomenal world from. Right? It's not fair. Right? That I am forcing the phenomenal world to be solid and permanent when it's not, when it's just shifting experiences of energy and space, right? Shaped and misunderstood by consciousness, which is just energy that knows, that's aware, which is our mind, right? Free the phenomenal world, so to free my mind from its fixation to realness, to release that energy and allow it to return back into space, to allow it to remember itself as emptiness and energy, to offer this profound permission just to return back and free everything from the illusion. And this is, of course, one of the first teachings of the Buddha, not just the Four Noble Truths, but also the Satipatthana as well, the foundations of mindfulness. Everyone's into that now. Um, but the Satipatthana as a text to remember through meditation, sati to remember what I am. And when I remember what I am, I remember what everything else is. Because everything arises from this fundamental experience of space, emptiness, energy. In some traditions, we will call this experience God, Buddha nature, the essence of all phenomena, the one taste, big mind, right? Basic goodness. Remember. I think even now, just as a little bit of an experiment, as a practice, just taking just a few moments to feel this instruction that I've been continuously offering, this instruction of remembering. What are you trying to remember? And it's not a place that we're going, right? It's the recognition of already being someplace. Remember the nature of things, that what I am is not my body or my identities. Where I'm at is not this beautiful Zen center on this land. To remember, to to just in your mind just say, I'm just trying to remember letting that thought go, offering that thought into the space and emptiness of your own mind, and just experiencing what arises after that. As knowing, because as we study the Heart Sutra, we're not actually trying to make anything disappear. We're not trying to make anything go away. That's not what we're doing. But first, begin to hold space, to notice everything, to not react, to allow everything to just simply arise as it does. The sounds of the insects outside, the temperature in the space, the light, sensations of our bodies, the thoughts and emotions of our mind. To allow both the joy and the despair to be present, both the gratitude as well as the hate. And this isn't supposed to be fun, because we're trying to transcend fun and boring. This profound work is getting back to a place of just being, just is. This is the truth telling part of this, which many of us are struggling to get to, is to be able just to say this is happening, not to agree with it, not to celebrate it, not to be okay with it, just to say this is happening. There's no liberation until you have the capacity to show up, tell the truth, and then you can respond in a way that feels freeing. And this is also what I would call in my work an expression of emotional labor, first for myself, telling the truth about what's happening, how I'm feeling, ending to these experiences, holding, getting curious. And again, this is the path to remembering. In just a few more minutes, not too much longer. Few more seconds. When you're ready, just heading yourself back into the space. Just feeling the weight of your body and the seat rising to hold you. Making that body do any movement that feels appropriate. There's a stillness here, too, in this remembering work. There's a stillness that we're trying to reattune to. Again, a re-remembrance. And it's the stillness that I think is imperative for the collective work that we're facing now. Right? For me, the stillness, the silence, the getting into this essence again is, again, an experience of rootedness. It's where I'm actually centered as much as possible. From the centeredness is how I respond to the world. This is how I arise as an agent of support, of benefit, an agent of liberation. You can't do that work without doing that rootedness. That rootedness is going to keep you from like actually flying up into a whole bunch of overreactivity, which is an expression of trauma, hyperreactivity. And so for me as a new saint, leaning to this period of apocalypse was really decolonization. Like it's like a decolonizing work that feels like death because we're so self-identified with carceral systems. Like, so when patriarchy gets disrupted, some of us feel like we're dying. When whiteness is disrupted, it feels like some of us are dying. We are. A part of ourselves has to die because that part of ourselves is actually keeping us from really getting free. So again, in this period of decolonization where all these systems are being disrupted, we have to train in remembering this stillness, this rootedness, this essence, because that's one, how we stay grounded, but most importantly, that's how we keep remembering that there's much more than just this world and this body. We exist beyond this. And as the Heart Sutra teaches us, we have to hold both of these extremes together. That this is important and real, and it's not. Bringing both of those together, right? The good, take the good, you take the bad, take them both. Then you have the thoughts of liberation, not of life. So I just kind of want to open up the space for any questions or anything. Um, 20 minutes left.
The way we do this is we go online. John Hinman facilitates that, and one of us I facilitate in-house. So since it looks like we're a little bit on the plus side in-house this time, let's start with in-house. Anyone have a question or comment they would like to address to Lama Rod at this time? Look at all of his followers over there and all social. What is this?
I'm not sure if these are followers. I think wasn't from you.
Well, the only reason a sandwich over there is I put a chair there.
Yeah.
You're in enemy territory, so what have you got for Lama Rod?
Um, I may have surprised you earlier when you introduced yourself, and I got really excited because 40 years ago, I heard almost the same thing during the AIDS period. I was an activist for
Oh, yeah.
gay rights
Mhm.
from a drag queen from underground Atlanta, saying just about the same words.
Yeah.
And to hear you say it now in a time that is both the same and different from that activism time, it was much more dangerous then.
Yeah.
Than it is now, and we are lucky it is not as dangerous as it used to be. What do you feel is the most dangerous thing of this time?
Yeah. In terms of like politics, activism, or just in general.
They seem to be all interconnected now. Just what strikes you the most dangerous?
It's our unwillingness to tend to our suffering.
Yes.
And overconsumption that we've engaged in that has destabilized the planet, the climate, relationships, you name it. We're trying to outpace the collective and individual trauma, and we're running out of places to go.
Yeah.
And that gets weaponized against people now, which has always happened, right?
I felt like we stopped paying as much attention as we might have at another time.
That's what happened. I think that's part of the way the oppressor manages the oppressed. You get a few resources and then people forget. I think about the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
We got access to places and spaces and then we lost that momentum, and this is why Black Lives Matter reemerged.
Yeah.
Right? Same thing with gay marriage. Like, we lost a lot of momentum and left a lot of people behind.
Yeah.
You know, um, but for me, yeah, I think it's important that you that you point out AIDS activism, because so many of those, those elders have been, of course, my elders have taught me about, HIV/AIDS activism, and there's a lot of stories. But also in my shamanic work, my mediumship work, I have a lot of gay men around me died from AIDS.
Yeah.
A lot of people can feel that. People with a little bit of capacity and intuition, they can feel that. And I learn a lot. I do things not because I have to, but I do certain things because it is an honor and to honor them, to listen to them. So I talk about this, I talk about this a little bit in the New Saints as well. I talk about the ways in which when I experience pleasure, that I am experiencing pleasure on behalf of so many people who didn't have the chance in their last life to really embody pleasure, because pleasure became synonymous with death.
One last thing.
Yeah.
Because I do mediumship too.
Oh, yeah.
Before this all started, I got the urge to play Leonard Bernstein's "Make Our Garden Grow."
Oh, wow.
So maybe it was a message of hope for you.
That's one of my, like I said, I was obsessed with Voltaire. Of course, Candide, right? Candide was the musical opera that Bernstein helped write. And one of my favorite songs is Make Our Garden Grow.
That is my main hymn.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, that's I want to offer something beautiful.
Yeah.
I have a whole chapter in the book, The Four Sweet Liberations, which again, it is in tributes and honor of, gay, queer, trans community. We've tried to create beauty out of so much ugliness. It's transformed the world. And I think this is why in this age of decolonization, the most underrepresented will actually become the leaders, as they've always been.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, if you pick up anything else, let me know. Yeah, anything else?
Anything further on it?
No, I think
that was it.
Over to you, John. John on board or online.
Thank you, Hojo. If anyone has a thought, question, reaction, response, feel free to raise your hand physically. You could put up a digital hand, or you could put the question in a chat box, and I'll try to address that. I'll just take you in order. Anyone out there have a response? Oh, we've got a hand up from Joseph.
Hey, I will try to be brief. I just to say it was an absolutely beautiful and brilliant discussion, and there's a ton of things we could get into, but I guess just trying to pull on the connections to Zen a little bit would be, I guess just one kind of maybe a too dialectical like reading of what you're doing, but like there's this connection between remembering and forgetting that I'm sort of thinking about, and just this kind of underlying problem of social integration, and Buddhism in particular evoking a very, direct kind of de-stratification. And I don't know, I just to say I really enjoyed the overall thrust of the discussion around, I sort of heard these three virtues of like care and clarity and courage. And courage in particular, I don't know, I like that one because it is like a philosophical virtue, and like how do you maintain fearless speech in the face of the worst, and maybe this dissolution of these democratic forms and all this stuff. But I it was absolutely brilliant, and I really enjoyed this sort of guided, thoughtful approach. But just this emphasis on like return and refuge, and you know Buddha did try to construct something of an intentional community, and it's not something we end up talking about in the Zendo, is sort of the way in which there is this task of kind of rebuilding agency, and maybe a sense of like love worthiness is a word that we've talked about recently, like maybe in particular in people abused by caste structures, and to sort of help remember what they really are. But that's also in order to sort of forget these negative kind of carceral images. So it's like this connection between remembering and forgetting. And I don't anyway, I really appreciated the discussion, and certainly that I want to remember is an amazing mantra and a good sentence to think about for like just loosening repression and kind of reaction in general. But anyway, there's a bunch more I could say, but anyway, absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for coming. This was amazing.
Absolutely. And just like a reflection on that, yeah, the remembrance, right? And so much of the work I think that we're being called to do, again, is remembrance, but that remembrance is actually about going on a journey. Like we have to go on a journey because some of us actually don't remember what we are, right? And so that means that you have to go on a journey to reclaim something. Right. And this fits into like my larger, work around sexual abolition now, which is that for us to remember, we have to go back and actually talk to the ancestors. Right. Our ancestors, the people who existed before whiteness, before patriarchy, before blackness, before Christianity. And to me, from my lineage, I have had to go back deep into my ancestry to actually talk to my early ancestors about how they embodied freedom before our enslavement. Right? And that's going to be, I think, really powerful, but also really scary, you know. And that means there has to be a kind of death. Like who I think I am has to die because it's no longer in service to collective freedom. And this is also to say that we're entering back into an age of magic. Like colonialism and these systems have disrupted our connection, our access to magic, because magic is unruly. It's the feminine, right? It's the other part of the binary that resists, you know. Um, I think these systems of control easily came into like the sacred masculine because masculine as an energy is about structure. It's something about opening paths and doorways, right? And it's easy to like get the masculine really rigid, right? And patriarchy took root in that. Okay? And we
Sure,
had
what
to
you mean
disrupt
by
that.
that? Magic. That
Oh yeah,
we had a physicist on board, and they don't like the woo.
I know it's wonderful, but it's no choice. You know, it's like my whole life has been arranged around people disliking my authenticity, and so it doesn't mean we can't create. You know, that's not about not creating community together. It's just about just holding space for everything. It's like there are going to be different expressions. I think it's wonderful. I just think, you know, and New Saints is really like if you read New Saints, I encourage you to take a look at it. It's real woo woo. Like even when I was writing, I was like, this is out there. Like, like I mean, this is really like for me. I said particularly after quarantine and like after the past 3 years have been really kind of grueling work for me personally around trauma. You know, and what that awakened for me is this recommitment to say, you know what, I actually need more than just science to get through this. You know, I adhere to a lot of really important somatic trauma work, which is evidence-based, which is wonderful. But I've had to drink ayahuasca and journey. I had to do. I mean, of course, being a lama, like we're just shamans anyway, so we're doing a lot, magic, kind of base work. But like the shamanic work in general is about recognizing how we're moving in between worlds. But there's more than just the physical. There's also this energy, spirit world, right? And how do we create balance? Ritual is how I maintain balance and communicate, right, as well. And so that's been important for me to come back to really just openly, as well. But I think that remembering magic is how we reclaim our agency as well. My people were forced into Christianity, and that created a kind of amnesia. Mm. Well, the Middle Passage first created amnesia for those of us descended from enslaved people. The only way you could survive being held in the guts of a ship for weeks is to deeply disassociate and to forget and to block. That's how we survive crisis and trauma for many of us, right? But it becomes collective. And when it's collective, it needs collective solutions in medicine, right? And so much of my work around like my ancestry has been to remember what my ancestors endured, to bring that back into consciousness, which is brutal, right? But I had the resources to offer it space and care. Right? And now that I have this memory, I'm no longer afraid of it anymore. And because that block has been removed, I have this direct access to my ancestral magic.
I'd like to ask for a response from one of your group. I wanted to say one thing you mentioned, demons earlier reminded me of Master Dogen when he was in China. He translated the Kanda Zenki from the Chinese. And that was his first tract. And then one line, Carvey Elephant scholar studied those line by line comparisons. And there was one line that was in the original Chinese that Dogen did not use. It said, as the path grows higher, demons flourish.
Yeah.
The theory is he didn't want to use it because it sounded negative, superstitious, and so forth, even for the 13th century. But I think we just have different kinds of demons.
That's the same with Tibetan Buddhism. It's like demons become anything that gets in the way.
Yeah.
Freedom, but in a more, but also Tibetans do believe in demons, as well. So like a literal, like, yeah, there are demons as well, and we have lots of practices that we use to like, cast out demons and exorcisms and everything. And there's multiple levels of belief here. So I often use mindfulness, and particularly the Satipatthana, to language, like evil and stuff like that, to give people a different door into these experiences.
Donna?
Sarah?
To change topic.
Sure.
You were speaking about hope earlier,
Yes.
and I wanted to know if you could elaborate on that and talk about what hope means for you,
Yeah.
the value it might have. Um, because I think speaking about French philosophers,
Yeah.
I had read this quote from Sartre when I read the book.
Yeah.
But this was something that always stuck with me, which is where he said that no hope is necessary to do anything. And that kind of put me in a place where I felt that even if I didn't have hope for things, there was intrinsic value in acting in the way that I saw it fit, in the way I saw was best for me and the best for others.
Yes.
I wanted to know where your kind of philosophy fits within that idea.
When people talk about how hope isn't necessary, for me, it lets me know that they've never had to survive anything, you know.
Hmm.
But no, but even in this tradition, we don't do hope in Buddhism.
Mhm.
Hope takes us out of the present into the future. But I counter that because, well, if impermanence is a law, then am I right in assuming that something will change? Particularly if I do the labor to make it change, if I shift the karma to practice, want it be different? Would I not be here? Like, if it wasn't for hoping for change and doing the work of change, you know? Um, but even more so, I think hope, like, yeah, hope can take us out of the future, but hope just opens the door of possibility. Um, and so return back to hope. Like, hope is one of the most powerful things that we can embody because it keeps us fluid and open and noticing potential. Like, I'm hoping for something different to happen, and therefore I'm sensitive to how to make that happen. I just don't sit around hopeful and just say, I hope the world gets free. No, it's like I hope the world gets free, and this is what I'm doing to bring about that vision. Let hope be really full and rich, right? Yeah, yeah. Don't let it take you out of the current work, but let it like restore you the work, like in a way that our ancestors, were remained hopeful.
One thing contrast that we use to address this, you might speak to a little bit of the difference between an expectation and an aspiration.
Yeah, that's right. The expectation, yeah, definitely feels very rigid. I expect you,
Yeah.
but aspiration is so, like, again, fluid and open. Like, these are the potentials in my aspiration, right? And then I can start investing in how to bring about that aspiration. But then then you get disappointed when you expect something and it doesn't happen. Like, I expect whatever, like, let that go and say, yeah, there are a lot of things that can happen. This is why, for me, practice, meditation, the rituals that we may do in our various traditions in Buddhism and other, like, traditions of magic are really important. Magic is about influencing phenomenal reality. We're always doing that. We don't like to call it magic, right? But that's what we are. And for us to remember, because there are people who are bringing about the worst, who are real invested in like rituals of dominance. Colonialism was a ritual of dominance, right? It was black magic. Like if you talk to shamanic cultures, like they see like violent oppression, a systemic oppression as just another kind of black magic. That's both literal, right, and also figurative.
So
Both are happening.
the conversion, converting to Christianity.
Yes.
Those things.
You know.
Let's go online and
Okay.
John, see if you have anybody.
Corolla had a hand up a moment ago.
Okay.
Yes, I did. That was a lovely talk, and I really appreciated it. And I think this emphasis on remembering is even more important right now when our culture is working on aggressively forgetting all sorts of things. The anti-vaxxers forget epidemics.
Yeah.
We have people who want to forget about the Trail of Tears, want to forget about Jim Crow, want to forget about redlining, and oh, it didn't really happen. We're going to take it out of the texts,
Yeah.
and so it's we really need our historians right now as much as anybody to remind us of all of these things. So, in a sense, what you're talking about is being a historian of a spiritual historian of
Yeah.
keeping things together that or keeping things in our awareness that people are really trying hard to forget because it does excuse a lot of ignorance, anger, and greed.
Mm-hmm. And it's just another way that we're trying to like bypass the suffering, to forgetfulness. If I can forget it, then I don't have to deal with it, but energy is neither created or destroyed. So we're still there, right? And that's I guess what's the word, sad, but no, it's heartbreaking, right? Because that that energy has to be tended to, eventually. And I realized early in my practice that like I have to do this, like, people joke about, the Four Noble Truths and the first being life, suffering. Yeah, it's just like, but when I heard that, I was so thrilled because I felt like I wasn't being gaslit. Like I was suffering.
Like it or not.
Yeah, I was suffering, and then this tradition appears and says, "Yeah, for a reason." Like this isn't like a mat. You are suffering. I was like, "Thank you." Like, and it didn't try to bypass it. It's like, no, you're going into it.
Right.
This is a path to go into it, and that changed my life.
We have another one for your posse, but since we're bifurcated in the room, I can see if anybody over here wants to say. David?
I have a question.
Maybe step up a little louder.
Oh, sure. I might. Yeah. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that you have gone very far from your family of origin and your immediate community and stuff. What advice or what observations do you have about, working with, your immediate ancestors and your family of origin and extended family, and how do you interact and relate with them through that?
I was just, at a party up in Rome last night with my family. Speaking of coming full circle back to this land, I would say stay transparent. Like at no point did I just disappear. When I decided to do three retreat and move to a monastery, of course, it was like joining a cult. And it's not much you can do for the optics around that, But what I did, I wrote an essay. I'm a writer. I wrote an essay for my family, and I just clearly laid out everything that I was doing, why I was doing it, And I was like, yeah, maybe people won't get this, maybe they'll shut it out, but at least I am not shutting down. My mother has always been like really supportive and open as well. And she's a big participator in the work that I do. She shows up to things, and she's a minister. And she's retiring from her formal ministry. Actually, now she just retired from the Methodist Church. And yeah, just to stay open, then I started writing books. And I think once the book started, and once just like I just started getting well known internationally and getting on to like Good Morning America. I think that was really the big thing. It's like I landed on Good Morning America, and then my family was like, "Oh, yeah, like you're doing something that like people like recognize. We don't get it, but we see other people, you know, um, acknowledging you. So this can't be so bad." You know. And that's again staying it's telling the truth. Like I continue to tell the truth.
We'll drop a name here. John Hinman lives in Rome, so you
Oh,
look up with John and you go. Isabel Wilkerson was here and she was working on her first manuscript, The Warmth of Other Suns. She brought it in actually, just like this thick,
beautiful.
and she was under pressure to get it done. So and I think she's landed on Good Morning America.
I see the landing on more than that, you know.
Once you're there, you're never going to.
The movie, like Origin, it's like beautiful. It's beautiful.
So we have one here.
Uh-huh. Your name is?
I'm Jaja.
Hi, Jaja. Hey, that means everything. That means everything. Just so many stories.
Yeah.
Where are you in the universe?
I drove in from Houston actually. Got it last night. I'm on my way to Asheville to Dallas, Jersey.
Okay.
Yeah. But
Something about a magic city.
yeah. So I'm grateful that the ancestors actually brought me here this month. Yeah.
If you ever need to stay over, and we do have rooms.
Thank you.
Full.
Yeah, I have cousins who live here. So let's get out of Houston. Let's get away from the storm. But you mentioned anger, and I did a lot of activist work as a drag queen, community activism and fundraising, as well as working in nonprofits, and most recently as a case manager for youth experiencing homelessness. I felt a lot of anger towards the system.
Yes.
And sort of what I viewed as new modern day slavery.
Yeah.
With keeping people in their places, just getting enough. And I wonder how you alchemized your anger when you in your own days.
You know what? It was rooted in self-love, which was the hardest thing. It was the hardest practice I've ever started. Right. Yeah. I'm still in progress, right? I'm still doing it. But it's the love for myself, which again I translate as like how do I hold myself in tenderness, spaciousness? How do I allow myself to just be without policing, without judgment? How do I create that world, that inner world that helps me to resist the pressures of the systems around me to be other than what I am? And that's the real journey. Like, it's not about me expressing myself and trying to disrupt systems. First of all, I'm disrupting the system of self-hate. And that's going to be the foundation of any activism. Any real transformative activism is going to be rooted in deep self-care and self-love. Like you have to get free, it's about being restored, not depleted. Right. And that's a carceral logic that keeps being fed to us, that we have to just work hard and we have to like drain ourselves and be exhausted to get free because that's a sign that we've done something.
Right.
So we have to flip that over and say, no, actually, I need resources to do the work of getting free because depletion feels fragmented. You know, we need to be whole in order to resist and disrupt systems that are trying to fragment. That's how we do it. I can't show up in the world and do what I do. I do a lot of like intense work, you know, around trauma, around dark energies and so forth. Like I have to be rooted, not only in my experience of self-love, but with my ancestors, with the guides and the beings around me. I have to be connected to their love as well.
Anything more on that?
Yeah.
We have one online.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That's a 5-minute warning bell, so
And I'll take one more question and I'll just finish with something.
fortunately for us, it's Cheerio
I-
Steve Park. He makes his comments very brief every time.
They're brief, and I held off to the very end this time. I hope everybody appreciates that. Lama Rod, thank you very much for this talk. I was struck by your statement that powerlessness and suffering leads to more suffering. And it's a matter. There's a personal matter that I'm going through at the moment that I will discuss with Roshi later, and it's not that matter is not immediately relevant here. But when I said that, I immediately thought then, well, what are males accused of? And it's that in any situation where there's a problem or where there is a suffering, if someone comes to us with suffering, we want to fix it. We want to do something about it. And that is perhaps not what should be done in that situation. What would you do? How do we get out of the powerlessness without thinking that we've actually accomplished something?
How do we get out of the powerlessness without feeling we've accomplished something? Is that
To go from a situation in which I say that I'm powerless in
okay?
this situation, I am
Okay,
powerless to do anything,
I
and
see.
I'm suffering because of that. And this is going to go on so long as I think that I have no power. And then when I get power, and I won't say that I've been empowered, but when I achieve power to do something,
Hmm.
that
So
I
it's
tend to misapply it, or that I tend to think now I'm in control.
yeah, yeah. Hmm. Control in many ways is another illusion, right? Because we have this need to conquer and dominate the external world, the phenomenal world, which ties us up into these logics. Like we're trying to dominate something that actually doesn't exist to begin with, right? And this is why I keep talking about bringing this work back to ourselves. I have power to choose how to be in relationship with my own mind, with my thoughts, my emotions, my body, regardless of how systems are impacting me. I have this fundamental choice. And that's what I first start training in. And that opens up space for me to meet the arising of the phenomenal world, be it situations, be it whatever, with this ease. I can just show up and say, okay, this is what's happening, and then this is how I'm choosing to respond. But it doesn't mean that I'm going to get what I want. Because it goes back to the expectations. I expect something to happen, but rather, this is what I hope to happen. This is what I aspire to happen, and this is the work that I'm putting into making that happen. And as my teacher would say, my root teacher would say, whatever happens, happens from that.
Yeah.
Right? You know.
Anything more on that, Shiryu?
No, thank you for your teaching.
So, John Hinman, do you have a closing that you would like to do? We have a closing verse we will chant in a moment. And I did have one more small question for Lama Rod.
And I'll just add something too.
Yeah, closing remark.
Yeah.
Yeah, the word you're using, what's that word?
Carceral, yeah, carceral logics like carcerality, prison.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, these logics around bondage and imprisonment.
So, John, you have something, and then Lama Rod would like to have a closing comment.
Yeah.
Nothing personally. Does anyone online want to follow up with a concluding thought or reaction?
Well, let me suggest something. I want to remind everybody that you stay online for the next 15 minutes or so. I think you go to another Zoom room.
We stay here.
So everybody online can talk with each other. But I think we do want to offer that anybody who wants to follow up with Lama Rod can do so. And anybody who wants to follow up with us here in Atlanta can do so simply by going to my email address or going to the website. For anything further, when we have this larger group, it's very difficult for everybody to get a chance to bring something up. We understand that, but we're here. You know where we are. You know where we
Joe,
live.
we might take a moment to welcome our guests that we've got online and on site. We have 2 or 3 online, including Dr. Jeff Lidke, that I know personally up in Rome, who invited and brought Lama Rod to Berry College, to the Buddhist fellowship there. So Lama Rod, thank you for coming and visiting at Berry College. You and I both are alumni.
That's right. Thank you for reminding me.
We used to go up there. There was a Korean teacher who invited us up. We started as sitting with years ago.
Dr. Lidke, did you have a final comment that you wanted to share?
Oh, well, Lama Rod, next time you're in Rome, you better give me a call, my brother.
I know. I got your message. I just kind of come in and come out. I was like, I can't stay in here too long. I don't like.
Yes. No, I loved your talk. Lama Rod is one of my all-time favorite human beings, and I think the work he's doing is so important for Buddhism, but transcends the limitations associated with labels. It's a message we need. This upcoming election is disturbing me, as I'm sure it is a lot of people, and we need new saints like Lama Rod. So thank you, brother. Beautiful message. Stay strong. Keep it rolling.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And just lastly, as we kind of finish up, I've been here for a couple of years, and we are beginning to really kind of stabilize our community here. And so we'll be kind of starting programs here probably later in the summer. And our goal is to establish a retreat center on land outside of Atlanta, for use, for people in this area.
But also as an offer there, we have a retreat center, which you certainly could get in. In fact, Brian is online. He's at the retreat center. He owns the property. It's up near Hayesville, North Carolina.
Okay, fantastic.
So you can talk with him about that.
Yeah. So our community is called the Spirit Underground. And it's kind of like this convergence of like it's a way that we're calling back into the abolitionist movement, anti-slavery abolitionist movement, which was a spiritual movement actually to end slavery, but really intersecting that with Buddhism, with a lot of like Black prophetic work, magic, plant medicine. One of our main practices will be the use of plant medicines and psychedelics in liberation work and working with complex trauma, rooted within Buddhism. And we'll be doing actual studies that we'll be collaborating.
You've hit a couple of notes that a few people here are involved in.
Yeah.
We could look at a collaborative approach between us.
Yeah, and so we're going to be really like coming online in a couple of months here in the community. So look forward to that, and we'll announce it. We haven't announced anything yet. We will in a couple of weeks. Yeah. So that's it. Okay. And then join me online.
We will.
On my website.
We will close. Thank you again. We'll close with the 4 great vows. We do them 3 times. So even if you're unfamiliar with them, somebody let me have a copy. You guys can share a copy. Okay. So this one.
Okay. These are numbers how to create them. Delusions are inexhaustible. How to end them. Darkness around us, they allow to take them. The little lights that seem impassable, I long to realize that these are numbers. I long to freedom. Delusions are inexhaustible. I long to freedom.
Darling, sir, and this, I vow, if you love, put away such impossible, I vow to be powerless, I vow to be the completion silence is often all, I vow to protect, darling, I vow to give the road away, the sun's to pass over. I
Thank you again for your patience and listening, and please do follow up with Lama Rod or any of us for any further discussion. We'll leave the online conversation going.